Trump again provoked allies with unjustified tariffs, this time targeting the EU and Canada. Does he really think that imposing a 200% tariff on European wine or tightening imports from Canada will make America stronger? Who is the loser in this dangerous game? President Donald Trump once again plunged trade relations between the US and the European Union, EU, into a spiral of tense confrontation by threatening to impose a 200% tariff on wine, champagne and spirits from the EU.
Champagnes and alcoholic products coming out of France and other EU-represented countries.
This move was made by Trump shortly after the EU decided to increase tariffs to 50% on American whiskey, raising concerns about a comprehensive trade war. Trump declared that this sky-high tariff was not a hasty decision but a tool to pressure the EU to change its tariff policy on steel and aluminum imported from the US. However, this policy actually only hurts both American businesses and consumers, who will face increased alcohol prices and more limited choices. The EU was quick to react, declaring it would not tolerate bullying and would take measures to protect its wine industry. Senior EU officials criticized Trump's tariff policy as irrational and warned that the move would not only damage European wine producers but also weaken trade relations between the two major economies. According to 2023 data, the EU exported about 13.1 billion USD of alcoholic beverages to the US, of which French and Italian wine accounted for the majority. If the 200% tariff is implemented, the price of European wine in the US will double, causing serious losses to EU producers and possibly significantly reduce market share in the US market. While the EU seeks to protect its industry, Trump's trade policy risks benefiting American wine producers. If imported wine becomes too expensive, American consumers may turn to domestic options, helping the American wine industry expand its market share. However, this benefit may come at the cost of an escalating trade war, in which the EU may retaliate with strong measures against US goods. Not only stopping at tensions with the EU, Trump also caused more turmoil when confronting Canada. The trade war between the two countries exploded when Canada announced retaliatory tariffs of $30 billion on US goods and threatened to tax an additional $125 billion if Trump did not withdraw his aggressive trade policies. Former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did not hesitate to criticize Trump, accusing the US government of deliberately damaging the Canadian economy. In a powerful speech, Trudeau warned Americans that Trump's policies would not only increase prices, but also threaten millions of American jobs.
Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods.
Just hours after Trudeau's speech, Canada launched its first response with a $3 billion tax package targeting key US industries. But this could be just the beginning if Trump doesn't back down. Canada is poised to unleash another $125 billion in tariffs over the next 3 weeks, taking this trade confrontation to a new level. Under Trump, America not only plunged into meaningless trade wars with longtime allies, but also created instability for its own economy. These confrontational tariff policies not only hurt American businesses and consumers, but also caused a backlash from global trading partners. With current developments, trade tensions between the US, EU, and Canada may persist, pushing the world economy into unprecedented instability. Not stopping there, Trump also announced the expansion of tariffs on important industries including steel, aluminum, automobiles, and agriculture. The White House justified the move by accusing Canada of failing to control its borders, allowing dangerous substances to flow into the United States. But is this really a border security issue or just an excuse for the Trump administration to manipulate the economy, pushing businesses and people into a state of confusion? Within just 24 hours after Trump's announcement, the US stock market plummeted, gasoline and grocery prices escalated, causing many businesses to face an uncertain future. Many factories are at risk of closing, while major US retailers warn that prices will skyrocket in the coming days, pushing millions of households into difficulty. Important states in the election are not left out. Kentucky is indignant at the high tariffs that Canada imposes on bourbon, and Michigan is worried that thousands of jobs in the auto industry will disappear if Canada cuts off the supply chain with the US. Despite facing fierce opposition, Trump is still pushing the trade war, perhaps hoping to use it as a political tactic to rally voters as the election approaches. But with Canada responding aggressively and the US market in chaos, the question is this really a wise move? Three important issues are shaping the course of this confrontation. Will Canada continue to escalate retaliation? If Trump does not make concessions, Canada could impose more stringent trade restrictions, possibly even cutting off the supply of critical resources on which the United States depends. Can Trump stand firm against pressure from American businesses? If the trade war continues to harm the economy, pressure from major corporations such as Ford, GM, and the agricultural industry could force Trump to reconsider his policies. Who will suffer the heaviest damage? Both Americans and Canadians are feeling the impact of soaring food, fuel, and commodity prices. If this war lasts, it could seriously damage both economies and put the US at risk of losing an important ally. Canada does not tolerate bullying. Ottawa has officially announced a 25% retaliatory tariff on US goods worth $29.8 billion, directly hitting key industries such as steel, aluminum, computers, sports equipment, and cast iron products. Canada's finance minister affirmed, "We will not stand idly by while the United States imposes unfair trade policies." Canada is ready to respond dollar for dollar. The United States and Canada once had a stable trade relationship with two-way trade volume exceeding $725 billion per year. But now, this alliance is on the brink of collapse. Former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, James Blanchard, warned that bilateral relations are at their worst point in modern history. The White House not only did not find a way to heal, but also added fuel to the fire. What is worth mentioning is that the reason Trump gave to justify this trade war is completely unfounded. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CEP, less than 1% of confiscated drugs originate from Canada. Clearly, the U.S. government is deliberately creating a trade crisis to promote a calculated agenda. The consequences of this policy are serious. The U.S. imports $15 billion in steel and aluminum from Canada each year, and Trump's tariffs will cause production costs to skyrocket, affecting industries from autos and construction to consumer goods. 75% of auto parts made in Canada are exported to the U.S., and if the supply chain is disrupted, the U.S. auto manufacturing industry will fall into serious trouble. The U.S. agricultural industry cannot avoid the impact when Canada imposes a 25% tax on agricultural products imported from the U.S., threatening billions of dollars in revenue for American farmers. James Blanchard stated clearly, "This crisis is fake." Contrary to Trump's claims, the United States does not have a trade deficit with Canada. In fact, the United States has a $12.5 billion trade surplus in the manufacturing sector. But Trump's reckless trade policies are pushing both economies into a downward spiral. A new poll from CNN shows that 56% of Americans disapprove of the administration's handling of the economy, and if this trade war continues, import prices from Canada could increase by 10 to 15% in just the next few months. 150,000 American jobs are at risk of disappearing, while inflation continues to squeeze the American working class. This is no longer a political game. This is a war that directly affects the lives of millions of people. The big question is, when will Trump admit his mistakes? Or will he continue to push both economies into crisis just because of selfish political calculations? The trade confrontation has just begun, and upcoming developments will still be surprising. When Trump temporarily reduced tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada, Ottawa announced that it would maintain the retaliatory tariffs until the decision became permanent. In response to Trump's unreasonable tariff policy, Canada announced a package of measures worth $760 billion. A move that surprised the entire European Union. Instead of suffering losses, Canadian businesses acted quickly. From small retail stores to large supermarkets switching to domestic goods or looking for products from Europe. E-commerce platforms specializing in Canadian products also recorded a spike in searches. But Canada isn't just responding with tariffs. The country has begun to expand trade relations with Europe and Asia, gradually reducing its dependence on the U.S. market. The CETA agreement with the EU has helped bilateral trade increase by 7% since taking effect, bringing great opportunities to Canadian businesses. An even bolder step is Canada's decision to cut electricity exports to 3 US states, a move that could increase costs and affect more than 1 million American households. Canada's strategy is increasingly clear: use energy as a strategic tool. By 2023, Canada will supply more than 50% of US oil imports. But now, instead of just selling energy to the US, Canada has boosted oil and gas exports to Japan and South Korea, gradually moving away from dependence on the US market. As a result, the United States risks facing unstable energy supplies and rising fuel prices. Meanwhile, Trump's tariff policy has created a strong wave of nationalism in Canada. The people, who have always favored cooperation and peace, are now united in defending their economic sovereignty. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau received strong support, and Canada's political landscape changed profoundly. This poses a new reality. Canada is gradually asserting its independent position in the international arena, no longer bound to the US economy. The negative consequences of the trade war do not stop in Canada. With total bilateral trade of more than $2 billion per day, the US-Canada relationship is vital to many American industries. Canada supplies most of the aluminum and steel to the United States, indispensable materials in the automobile, construction, and defense industries. When Trump imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, production costs in the US skyrocketed, causing the cost of cars and construction materials to increase sharply. Immediately after Trump's announcement, the US stock market plummeted. The S&P 500 index lost 1.7% in just one day. Inflation is expected to rise, causing food, fuel, and consumer goods prices to escalate. The American people need to clearly understand that this is not a war between Canada and the United States, but a reaction to a wrong policy of the Trump administration. More than 9 million US jobs depend on trade with Canada, spanning sectors from manufacturing to agriculture to technology. If the trade war continues to escalate, more than 1.2 million workers in the US auto and metal industries could lose their jobs. Currently, 70% of US oil imports come from Canada, and any disruption could cause gas prices to skyrocket, directly affecting the pocketbooks of Americans. Not only stopping at counter tariffs, Canada immediately imposed a 25% retaliatory tax on US goods worth $155 billion USD, targeting industries such as whiskey, agriculture, automobiles, and steel. A wave of boycotts of American products is spreading, with more than 60% of Canadians reducing their purchases of American goods. The US tourism industry was also heavily affected when hundreds of thousands of Canadians canceled their plans to visit the US, causing the industry to lose $5 to $8 billion in revenue. Trump went so far as to claim that Canada's financial system is on the brink of collapse. However, the reality is completely opposite. Canadian banks are among the most stable financial systems in the world, with a bad debt ratio of just 1.1%, significantly lower than the US level of 3.5%. Not only that, 16 major US banks are still operating and earning huge profits from the Canadian market, showing the confidence of financial institutions in this country's economy. US economic experts warn that this trade war could cause US GDP to decrease by 0.7% to 1% within 12 months. Clearly, Trump's strategy is not making America great again, but is pushing the economy into a self-inflicted crisis. Canada is gradually emerging from America's shadow, and North American relations may never be the same again. The question is, will Washington be alert enough to realize its mistakes, or will they continue to engage in a never-ending trade war?